I'm very interested in what you said too about the basis, and this is going to be something that a lot of people don't know about. What you said is that a lot of basis in veganism comes actually from the Black community.
Yes.
So, can you get into that a little bit about where that comes from and some of the history that you know about veganism in the Black community?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. So, and I don't want to get too much into like because there's also debate around this, right? So, I used to be in the Nation of Islam, which there was a book written by Elijah Muhammad called How to Eat to Live, which was literally the first book I ever read about dieting, and it was in a religious context. And literally in the book, he says the best things to eat are fruits and vegetables, right? Although a lot of people know the Nation of Islam for selling bean pies and bean soup and whiting fish and things like that,
Mm.
a lot of people that and especially in the Muslim world broadly, there aren't a lot of vegans and vegetarians. So I was in this organization where we had a diet that was based upon that particular book.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you had more of an Afrocentric community that was based on some other folks, and they actually were at odds, right? So there was like this big debate about what's the best diet. And there were several people, and I don't really want to mention names because I don't 100% agree with all of the things that they said, quite
Right.
honestly,
Yes.
to get into like the weeds of it. But yes, there is a tradition of just eating the way that people ate traditionally, right? Like so our ancestors, so to speak, would eat lots of root vegetables and tubers and things like that, would graze, would do things like that. But yeah, it's not that there was no meat in Africa, but people don't really understand this. In the developing world, quote unquote, or whatever we call, that
The world,
people that aren't
the world
enriched.
of the world of more material stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. In other countries, meat is a luxury, right? Like when you're in a poor country, it's much easier to get like rice and beans and things like that, or to forage for vegetables and to cook them than it is to go kill something and process the meat. I mean, it's a much more involved process, and it's also usually more expensive. So it wasn't like there was this real reasoning behind it, like some moral standing. It was literally just the way people ate, based on the culture. And there was a movement of folks who were very Afrocentric, going back to probably 60s and 70s. People like Dick Gregory, who was a name I can mention, a very famous comedian, political thinker. He had been vegan for years. He just didn't go around preaching about it, right?
Right.
And that's the thing. That's kind of the difference too. I feel in the Black community, the approach to veganism now, even the conversation is more about food justice than it is about animal welfare and animal rights. Not that it's non-existent in that community, but the context is more around we have these food deserts, we have communities where there aren't grocery stores, where there isn't produce. That's the activism that's going on in the Black community right now. Whereas sort of on the, I guess, the larger vegan community, it's more about, PETA and all that kind of thing. And so there's definitely a difference. But there's also a very strong tradition just because of the roots of, how we used to eat before we went through slavery, right? Like, so a lot of the foods that we consider soul food or quote unquote Black food actually came as a result of Black people cooking for white folks in their kitchen, taking what was
What's left of it?
left, right?
Yep.
And making something tasty out of it because Black people were just creative, right? But that's what we do, but we don't have to do that anymore by and large, right? So the fact that we hold on to those traditions in this sort of, in my opinion, unhealthy way, like, but this is what, if I don't have my pig's feet and hog maws, like that doesn't make you not Black because you stop eating garbage. That's like literally killing you. There's no shame in that. And there actually is a very rich history. If we go before slavery to where we were eating natural foods, we're eating vegetables, we're eating grains, we're eating all these things, and we weren't drinking milk. So like this whole thing about dairy, it's like, why are so many Black people lactose intolerant? Because like they're by and large not a lot of cattle in West Africa, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if you go to South America, there's probably more cows than people. At least that's what they told me when I went to Brazil and Argentina. They're like, we eat beef down here because there's more cows than people. Well, that wasn't really the case in Africa. So it's just like this call back to who we really are before we had to survive on the foods that we had. And I think that that is much more meaningful to me if we're looking at culture than it is for me to preserve, my ability to eat, sweet potatoes smothered in king syrup and butter because somehow that reminds me of my childhood. Like that we have to just get away from some of those ideas if we want to live longer.